Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren Jaime, and if you're asking the question, what is this show about? We take a look at a lot of the inequities that people face. We promote civic engagement, multiple points of view, and we have some very interesting guests who tell us a little bit about their organization and the work they're doing to influence the community. We want you to stay tuned because guess what? The Social Justice Forums begins right now. And welcome back. Mekong NYC is a social justice organization that is bringing dignity and value to the lives of Southeast Asians in the Bronx and also throughout New York City. Now, the organization does this through community organizing as well as movement building, centered healing through arts and culture, and creating a soft safety net through community power. And joining us now, we're pleased to have the campaign director of Mekong NYC. We've got Nhann, who's with us as well. And thank you, Cameron, for being with us.
Thank you so much. Welcome to be with you.
Thank you. And so when we talk about social justice, let me just ask you the question from your perspective. How do you define social justice as a social justice organization?
So for very multi-layered, very intersectional. For me, I think about all the different things that we provide as a community-based organization, right? Thinking about what are some of the, systems and structures that continue to put harm in our communities? What are the things that continue to put barriers that make it that much harder to access, whether it's service, to access a better quality of life, as well as some of the things that it takes you to live a happy and healthy day, right? And so for me, social justice includes everything from, making sure that you have food on the table, making sure you have somewhere safe to live, making sure you have access to a good paying job, as well as making sure you're living in a safe neighborhood and community. And so what are some of the things, the root causes for us as a community to really name and understand the history of that? What does that mean and look like? And what is our place in making sure that we continue to fight and uplift systems and structures that continue to put harm in our communities, and making sure that we're doing this in a way that benefits everyone and making sure we're leaving no one behind.
I know that Mekong NYC does a good job of really tackling the issue of health justice. And when we talk about health and the inequities that so many people face, let's talk about your organization and how you're on the front line doing that. What are some of the things that people can know when you talk about health justice from your perspective?
Definitely. So for Mekong, health justice is at the very root of our work. We believe that, organizing and healing is intersectional and very impactful in the work that we do. Mekong, our community members, specifically the Vietnamese and Cambodian refugee and immigrant communities from the Bronx, come from a history of war, violence, and genocide. And so for us, we are walking embodiment of intergenerational trauma, understanding what that means in our bodies, our spirits, understanding like how that has deeply impacted our life and our daily routine. And so, our communities coming over as refugees during the early 80s to the Bronx and through the country, like we also experience all the different hardships that other communities of color continue to deal with, right? So for us, it's just more levels in which that we understand what healing looks like. And healing also can for us, thinking about our community, our culture, our heritage, right? What are some of the traditions what are the rituals that keeps us grounded, keeps us centered, but then also recognizing that history is very important. And so for us, like any space that we go through, we need to make sure we're naming those narratives as part of our history, but then also understanding like we too are dealing with the same system structures, right? We talk about social determinants of health. What are the things that impact our daily life, and what are the things that continue to inhibit us to have that better quality of life? And so those things, we walk very heavily in understanding, whether it's through arts and culture programs that we do to pass traditions, making sure that we're uplifting our language and culture, as well as making sure that, we are connected with our community and our environment, right? Making sure that the common struggle is actually something that connects all of us. And so understanding those health disparities and understanding that health justice is a very big umbrella to all the different work that we do. We think of it as a very holistic approach in our work.
Yeah. And I also want to take the time to talk about some of the struggles. You said common struggles. And one of the common struggles I think a lot of people face in New York City is economic security, jobs, income, being able to live affordably. I know your organization has done a good job of providing emergency assistance to those who've been in need. Share with us a little bit about the emergency assistance program and the recipients of that.
Absolutely. So I think everyone seen and saw how this COVID pandemic impacted everyone across the board. I think there's no denying that. But I think one of the biggest things that we continue to name is that the pandemic just highlighted ongoing existence and struggles that communities of color have been facing for generations. And so for us, like understanding like what would be the best way for us to attack that. And so, very much like everyone else, like we had to shut down our office, had to work remotely, understanding this new world that we had to go in. And so that doesn't change the fact that communities still needed support, still needed services, still needed the resources that were very much needed to them. And so for us, we always say that we are the safety net of our community members because of these disparities. And so some of the very first things that we did was start doing community check-ins, right? Calling our community members, seeing how are they doing, seeing if they had access to the information and resources when we were just learning about the pandemic. And so early on, we were talking about like, what are some of the things that we can support around, health supplies, hand sanitizers, mask, gloves. And then we started talking about like care packages, like, making sure that we have, some vegetables, some fruits, some produce, things that we can give to our community members. And part of that, we were talking about like, what does emergency fund and mutual aid look like, right? Making sure that a lot of our community members are elders and don't have access and can't physically work 9-to-5 jobs, right? And so what are some of the ways that they can get benefits in cash? And so we were able to do like emergency funds, able to give out a $500 stipend to community members as like this one-time thing to help support, groceries, support whatever the things that they were going through at that time. And so for us, that just opened up like the continued need for a service like that. And so right now in this moment, we're actually still, talking about what does mutual aid can look like in our community, having like a fund or pot that can be controlled by community to help support when someone's, going through a hard struggle. This is one way that we can tap in and help support with the guidance and leadership of community member to be able to participate and redefine in our own sense of like what mutual aid could look like.
Yeah. You talk about access and aid. I want to go back to a little bit about that health justice, because I know that you've had some challenges, particularly with the Montefiore health system and how it impacts actually its proposed moving, because there's going to propose move that's going to actually impact a lot of people. Make our viewers aware a little bit about the situation going on in Montefiore and the potential impact that it has for your constituents.
Definitely. So one of the ongoing local campaigns we're working right now is the Save Family Health Center. So for folks that don't know, the Family Health Center is located at 401 Plaza. And so over the last few months, we've heard that there were going to be changes in services that were going to be provided. Doctors were going to be moved, services were going to be closed. And this center is a fairly qualified health center. It provides a multitude of services, family medicine, women reproductive support. It has residency program, and also houses a Southeast Asian mental health program. And so for us, when we heard of these things, community members were triggered, were traumatized of like, yet again, we're being displaced. So what we heard is that in this moment, there's 3 existing clinics and there will be like a shuffle of them. So there's the Grand Concourse Clinic, there's the Family Health Center, and then the Williamsburg Family Health Center. So what we've heard was that the Grand Concourse Center would be closing and moving staff and doctors into Family Health Center, and that staff from Family Health Center would be moving to Williamsburg Family Health Center. So essentially it's a big shuffle, but then ultimately the biggest thing for us is like, who was a part of that decision and who was included. And so what we've been told was that staff wasn't included, community and patients wasn't part of that deciding factor. And so for us, like we're thinking and talking about like how this continued to cause harm and impact communities across the board. And so like this center is very violent and creates stability in the community. And so, when we see like services being changed and, one thing being said and shared, but then the other thing too is like actions being moved. Like we continue to say the ways that services has changed over the years, less access to those things. And so for us, it's like making sure that this is a very prominent issue. Like any type of changes or closure will impact lives across the board for Bronxites. And so for us, making sure that we're uplifting that, understanding the needs of the community, especially in the Bronx, right? We are one of the most unhealthiest community in the Bronx, right? When we talk about health disparities from all communities of color. And so for us, any type of closure to any health center would be a big and drastic impact in our daily lives. So we wanted to make sure that this is something that continues to be uplifted and making sure that people can join the fight and really learn what's been going on.
Yeah, let me switch gears a little bit and move from talking about health and move over to housing, because housing is important too, right? And we know there's so many people who are struggling to find affordable housing, and even for the people who are living today, just to be able to make it. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on a lot of people, displacing a lot of people. Some people not able to really maintain their living. But I know your organization has also been front and center in dealing with the issue of housing and also advocating for a lot of tenants. So let's talk about the work that's going on in terms of advocacy that you're making on behalf of so many tenants here in New York City.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we learned over the years is like, community organizing, advocacy is such a vital piece to our work. And thinking about from, local level, city level, state level, like advocating for our community members, making sure that the issues are being heard and felt, are being uplifted, and making sure that we're bringing this to our elected officials, right? Making sure we're bringing this to decision makers to one, not only be able to have a seat at the table, but then also making sure that we're bringing our community's narratives and stories and experiences to be part of those things. And so, a great example around the advocacy has been around our coalition building. So over the last few years through the pandemic, we've been able to build our Bronx-wide coalition made up of other community-based organizations throughout the Bronx to really fighting around, economic democracy and racial justice. And so, land use, housing has been a big issue, naming those health issues again, talking about the environment, talking about climate, talking about transportation, just to name a few of the different sectors that the coalition has been really working and advocating for. And so for us, it's around like community ownership. And it is about land, right? It's about making sure resources from the Bronx stay in the Bronx, but then also making sure like community has a say around that ownership and what that looks like. And so, the pandemic continues to just show how the system is very flawed. Knowing that the pandemic would freeze the way that people have access to jobs and wages, but then also having systems that are like pushing, community members and tenants out of the housing. So the biggest thing is like learning what are the actual mechanisms that forces someone to be evicted, but then learning like what are the actual resources that are needed and what are the ways that we can keep people in homes, and talk about what are the ways that we can own shared wealth. And so, part of that work is like community land trusts, making sure that, community understands like, hey, if there's vacant spaces or if there are, different land that is available for communities, say these are the spaces for us to be actually engaged, and that's figuring out like what are the ways that we can continue to build wealth and resources in the Bronx.
Yeah, I want to talk and shift a little bit. You talk about community. One of the things that I know that you're also advocating for is that of nail salons, and that's pretty prevalent in the Asian immigrant community. A lot of business owners have gotten in the area of nail salons. What is it that you want the community to become more aware of? And talk a little bit about that advocacy, because you're really raising your voice to be a strong advocate.
Absolutely. So over the last few years, I think the nail salon industry has been a very big focal point around the state. Like it is an industry that is self-sufficient and has been, running in our communities for generations, right? And across the board, like I think any new immigrant or immigrant community sees that they have a local, nail salon shop that they go to. And so oftentimes like those conditions are very different, right? Depending on the community that you go to. And so for us over the last few years, working with our coalition partners around the country, like understanding what the standard looks like. So last year we was able to push a bill, a nail salon standard bill to actually like level the playing field, right? When we talk about safe environments, when we talk about wage, we want to make sure that the industry doesn't just penalize, nail salon owners and workers, but actually create a pathway to resources and actually being able to place for those conditions to be better. And anything when we talk about, these industries, whether it's nail salon, whether it's beauty shops, whether it's barber shops, the biggest thing is around how do we protect the integrity of these small businesses, right? These are amazing work in additions to community. So how do we make sure we uplift small businesses and provide those access to resources, right? When we saw the pandemic hit, a lot of shops had to shut down because there was no clear pathway to those things. But specifically too, like our nail salon work is around like organizing workers and owners to seeing that there's a place around like how do we create a better conditions, working environments, and making sure that there are living wages for us. And so, not just around the penalty piece and penalizing folks and shops, but then how do we make sure that there is clear direct communication and actual process in making sure that we're getting these better conditions.
Yeah. When you talk about the issue of enforcement, I know that a lot of concern continues to go around deportation. So many people in our community are living under the fear of deportation. You have an anti-deportation initiative, I know, as well. I want to get an opportunity to talk a little bit about that because talk about just the sentiment in the community right now, because we know that in years past, we've seen ICE operate at all-time highs. And a lot of people are really concerned, even though there has been a change in the presidential administration, that there is this still fear of deportation. So bring us a little insight as to what you're seeing and what you're hearing and your response within the community.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we continue to learn around this anti-deportation work, ICE's job is to continue to put fear in communities, right? Whether or not, we have a say of who gets to stay or go. I think the biggest thing is understanding like what are the mechanisms and systems and structures that continue to cause harm. And so for us, like, one of the two actually very big things that we've been working on over the last few years. So one, as part of our statewide work, we actually launched a clemency coalition of New York over the last few years. And this is really targeted around our work around commutations and providing pardons. So this work is around communities of color across the board. So making sure that we're advocating for folks that have been, been locked up, that has been doing very long time, and depending on their their age and condition, like commutation is a way to get them out to be able to be free. And then the pardon piece is like making sure that there's a clear process and pathway for people to actually apply for pardon, to be able to be notified, and to actually be able to fight for their case to be released. And so that was the state level piece of the clemency work that we've been able to do over the last few years. One of the big federal things that we're actually gearing up to do is around our Southeast Asian Relief and Response Bill. And this is a bill that we've been working on to actually not only stop the deportation of Southeast Asian folks around the country, but actually bring people back that have been deported to Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And so for us, we're actually gearing up a very monumental historical moment later this week, and we're actually going to be heading to DC to do an official launch of this federal bill, making sure that we're educating the community about the work that's been going on over the last few years, like making sure that we are instilling education and understanding, families play a big role in the anti-deportation work, but then also making sure that there is a voice around this. I think for many, many years, this instillment of fear and stigma around someone that's being incarcerated or someone that done their time, like we want to very, very much understand those narratives and say like this has never been about a good immigrant, bad immigrant, right? This is always about what is the humanity and dignity that we want to uplift as part of the work that we do. And so, building that narrative, making sure that our community understands, and having those open conversations and dialogue too. And it's okay, like we do have a space for us to, disagree, but then also being mindful and open to having what that means it looks like. And so when you have someone who's been directly impacted, like share about these experiences and understand that we've all been impacted by the same systems and structures, I think that's when we get to real transformation and open dialogue.
So for people who want more information to get connected to your organization and the work that you do, what is available to them?
So you can directly reach us out at our email, mekong@mekongnyc.org. We are on all social media platforms, Mekong NYC on Facebook, on Instagram, Mekong NYC _ and so, yeah, please stay connected, please stay informed, and continue to celebrate community.
Khamarin, thank you so much for being with us in the work that Mekong NYC is doing, bringing us some very important information in terms of a community that sometimes is underserved and underrepresented, but you're standing on the front lines. Thanks so much, brother.
Thank you so much.
All righty. Well, we do have more here on the Social Justice Forums. We want you not to go anywhere. We're going to continue in a few seconds. And welcome back to the show. Theater has always been a means of investigating humanity, sharing stories, and examining our role in the local political as well as the global community. Theater of the Oppressed NYC partners with communities facing discrimination to inspire transformative action through theater. Joining us now is the Director of Communications and Creative Advocacy at the Theater of the Oppressed NYC, Omari Soulfinger. And Omari, glad to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
So pretty interesting here how you take theater and you take it to a place of advocacy. So for a few people who may not know more about your organization, give us a little more insight.
Sure. So Theater of the Oppressed itself is a methodology that comes out of Brazil in the 70s. And it was used, the best way I can describe it is rehearsal for real life. It was used at a time where folks didn't have the same access to education, were speaking different languages, and frankly, there were real problems in the country. And so how does legislation get passed? How do we navigate community challenges, right? How do we try out different ideas if we all can't communicate? And how do we balance the power dynamics that exist in different spaces? And so theater and presenting real stories and everyone getting to have the same experience at the same time, and then to comment on how they see the problems that are presented, and project their own experiences onto the play. It was one way to begin that dialogue. Then we often invite folks after the play is done. It's a short play that usually ends in some sort of failure or someone not getting what they need or what they want, which we see as oppression. We would then invite the audience to step in as one of the characters in the play and try to get what they need or want. And in that part of the play, they are now trying out different solutions. They're actually walking what they talk. Intervention, if that even legislation that they propose works. And so in this way, we're making democracy more participatory. We're making it more interactive. We're practicing for how we want to confront these problems when they occur. And frankly, it makes advocacy way more engaging.
Yeah,
and so,
I didn't mean to cut you, no, but I'm saying, so, at the end of it, you got social change, right, and social awareness. Are you finding that many people are really at the place of a social awareness?
Yeah, I think that the process of moving these problems from a head place to a heart place to a body place and actually doing it is the first step to actually doing something in real life, right? That to see that you actually are the expert because you have the lived experience and you're able to bring it out. And then for folks who think they are the expert, think they have all the answers, and then we're like, okay, well, let's do it right now. We can also process of like, oh, so this is living in an idea place, but when it comes to real action and doing something, there's some challenge. challenges. And so we do think the process itself is not going to solve anything, right? But it is about preparation to taking the next step towards action. So it is all definitely about awareness and cultural organizing.
So you have what's called the legislative theater. And
Sure.
when you have the legislative theater, how does that work?
We invite the people who have the responsibility and the power to make legislative change into the space. So not only are they going to hear from the community, their constituents, and folks who are affected by the problem, and see an example of that and see an example of the solutions, they are in the space to either offer take what's happening from the process and draft legislation on the spot, offer commitment, or to present legislation that they're already working on and allow us to introduce that concept into the play. And so again, it's a way, it's participatory democracy, and it's a way to bring the people to the street. I think of Theater of the Oppressed, it solves this problem, this paradox we have of like us who have access to the books and the documentary and the panels and the lectures. We then go to the people who don't have those access and say, this is what you need to do to make your life better. This is what you need to be doing to liberate yourself. And that in itself is an oppressive dynamic. And so I think legislative theater allows us, like, let's all get in the same room, let's all have the same experience, let's all then together work. And I think it's important to have the people that represent us there and then hold them accountable to what they experience together when they go to the more formal government spaces.
So talk to me about response, because this is pretty innovative. It's pretty interesting, right? You're taking legislation, you're bringing it to the theater, you're having people who are part of the audience actually be a part. You've got actors as well. What's the response like when people start to engage in this kind of form? Normally, you know, we can say we'll sit around a table, right? Or we'll sit in a U shape, we'll get some tables, we'll get some chairs, we'll talk about it, we'll hash it out, we'll use the whiteboard, but you're using stage, you're using theater. And how does that, you know, how does that resonate with those?
So in this tradition, we have this concept of demechanization. And what we're offering is that when oppression exists because we've all been mechanized, we've all been conditioned to act, to be a certain way. And so, yeah, the U-shaped table, the didactic thinking, that helps to be predictable and help things continue the way they are. And so we need to demechanize it. So we introduce art and the games and the playfulness to introduce confusion. Right. And we call this good confusion, because this good confusion, this place of like, I don't know what's going to happen next. This is unpredictable. It creates equity. So we're all doing this at the same time. And it also evokes our core human elements of like, as a child, you learn through play, you learn through experiential learning. And so we're all going back to that. And from there, we will then try to solve this problem. So that the initial impact is we get really good at our job. We call our facilitators jokers, not because we're funny, but because in a deck of cards, we're the wild card. And so we're going to change the rules on you. And
right.
That experience has its own experience. But once the rules are changed, then we can actually change the larger rules in which are creating the conditions that our people are in right now. So it's a journey. It's unorthodox, and it's way more interesting, frankly, right? Like it's way more interesting and way more accessible to all kinds of people who learn differently, and also who speak different languages. You know, I feel like here in New York, we all speak English, but we all speak the same
language,
right?
Yeah. And so I think about advocacy, right? Because that's exactly what it is. Really having a form of advocacy in a different kind of way. Part of your work is creating that, right? And letting people know that they have the ability to really be advocated for, and then at the same time also be advocates.
Yeah.
Give me a little about how you guys operate in the area of advocacy, because I know that's a core component of what you do.
So I think it's important that when we use the word actors, we're not meaning, you know, Denzel. So we're meaning anyone who takes action. And so our invitation to engage in this process and to become an actor is that you can take actions for yourself. And so on one hand, we believe everyone can be an activist or an advocate, right? On the other hand, it is important to be in good relationships with folks who, I'm not going to say that they're expert. I think anyone that is facing this problem is an expert, but folks who are professionally engaged and recognize the way the system currently works, right? And so it is important to be in relationship with direct service community organizations. It's important to be in relationship with the advocates and the organizers and the block mayors and all of those folks, as well as elected officials. And so our work, I think, is to balance that we treat them the same, we treat them with the same amount of respect and the same amount of expertise, but that the way that things currently are, we need both, right? We need to have good relationships with our electeds, but we also need to have strong, trusting relationships with the folks that actually keep us safe and actually know the dynamics and what's going on.
You're pretty interesting there. Activism as a whole, I want to talk about that because, you know, that's what you're doing. You're really taking activism and taking it to another level. I know a part of what you also do is really giving some workshops that are really designed to promote and to deal with this area in particular. For somebody who's out on the outside looking in, how does that work?
So a big part of we don't want to gatekeep, right? And so I'll say that we have a workbook that you can work. It's 200 pages, it's free, it's graphic, that anyone can take this book and learn how to do this method with whatever community they want to work in. So that it's not, we're not holding this behind any academic institution or artistic institution. On top of that, we have funding that allows, like, if you have this problem in your community and you want to bring us in to work with you, to train you up, we will facilitate as well, but the goal is for you to be able to hold this tool on your own. So that can mean anything of like me training your folks on how to do forum theater or legislation theater or conflict mediation with role play. And I can hold that space for you. But my ultimate goal is that you feel confident enough to be an actor, to be a joker, and do this thing on your own, right? Like the relationship that we're looking for is that there is no external validation that you really need. Support, absolutely. Guidance, 100%. But then eventually you're taking this tool that's free for anyone to use and using it wherever you want it, whether that be your family or your community or your apartment building, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Omari, I know you guys are celebrating the 10-year anniversary. Talk to me about how you've seen growth in the organization, and not just organization, but also the impact that you're having in community.
Sure. So 10 years ago, this all started in a John Hus church and with a troop of folks who were experiencing homelessness and doing their stories, right? And thinking about issues. It then grew towards, we have our office. We realized that to make this work sustainable, it needed to be a nonprofit so that everyone gets paid to participate for their stories, to go through the process, and as well as our facilitators. And that was important. We then realized, hey, how do we make sure that this looks evidence-based? We have a legislative theater report to show that this works. We then made relationships with council members and got a couple legislation passed, all from theater, going through the process, and there's at least 8 versions of that. And then COVID happened, right? And the question was like, folks really need us right now, and there is a story of what's happening with the pandemic. And so we figured out how to adapt into Zoom theater. And we were doing full-on forum theater shows, creating them and performing them completely online, while also giving our folks a relief fund, just to, anyone who had worked with us in the last, at that point, 8 years, was access to funds just to get through these hard times. And now we're coming back out again. And the question is, how do we do this equitably, accessible, and keep everyone safe? And so, and we have this workbook, as I mentioned before. And so it's been 10 years, and to continue to grow. I think the methodology started in the 70s. And so the context in which it exists doesn't exist anymore, right? And so, this was frankly a tool to get folks prepared for a possible revolution, right? And now we have to think about let's still look at these larger institutions, but let's also look at the internalized oppression, because maybe the internalized oppression inside of us, and using theater to address that, will also then help us get ready to act to change the world outside. So those are the directions that we possibly could be going in the future.
So as you look towards the future, talk to me about what you see. Obviously, 10 years, you've seen a lot of growth and impact now. You set your sights forward. What can we expect coming up in the near future?
Oof, man, I don't want to be a fortune teller, but we have to adjust into this new climate and context, and also hold ourselves accountable to the fracture in relationships that have occurred, and this is in all different spaces, right? We can think about what is the impact of having our children have really disjointed education for 2 years, right? And how do we then socialize again in the physical space? Is that something that can happen? We can think about that, yeah, for the president can say the pandemic is over, but there is folks who with immunity compromised and long-term COVID and all these different things. So I think it's still introducing this tool and getting people to play and be in theater again in spaces. But it's hard when the material conditions are still so tough for me to come and say, hey, let's play pretend, right?
Right.
So how do I convince you that we're playing pretend towards real action, but we need to practice and create a safe container and build these relationships here in this incubator first before we can actually do this in the real world. And slowing down and saying like there's an urgency to everything right now, and there's also this invitation for rest, and that rest can be resistance, and play and imagination can be hope. And so it's delicate, it's really delicate, but I think what we're interested in as an organization is getting this tool out to people to use in whatever way they see fit, instead of dictating this is how it goes and this is the way it's supposed to be used.
Yeah, you've been on the ground for a minute doing this. Talk to me a little bit about social justice from your perspective. How do you define social justice?
I want to also name it's when what we talk about here often is the three important things for us is ethics, style, and then accuracy. And so my ethics is calling me to say this is just my opinion, and I don't represent. We're a larger community, and so social justice for me is really about relationship building first. Or do we have sustainable, healthy relationships with the folks around us and support? And from there, those relationships, do we also have the material conditions? Do we have the shelter? Do we have the food? Do we have the income? Do we have the mutual aid to maintain those relationships? If there's any disruption to our relationships and to our material conditions, then we do not have justice. And I leave it open to that because the small is also beautiful. If we're talking about that within my own family, there are injustices that are not talked about, that are not addressed, that have created fractured relationships. And because of that, the way the resources, whether that be time, money, housing, are also fractured, then that's all that matters. I don't think that I can ask someone to focus on the larger New York problem of they're cutting our schools and housing is a problem and the police and so on, unless we can focus on the micro. And there are other folks who are already agitated about the macro problems of the city and the community and want to start there. But then it still has to come back to like, how are you projecting the interpersonal problems on the larger problems? And so I just want to frame justice as again, it's a series around the health of our relationships and our relationships to ourselves, I should say, our self-esteem and our body, our health to our relationships, and also the sustainability of our material conditions.
Omari, we got to leave it there, but I want to thank you so much for introducing us to the work that you do.
Sure.
Certainly an innovative approach, and I think that it really tackles the issue front and center. Great having you, and certainly please come on back and share when you got some other things happening.
Appreciate you, Daren.
All righty, Omari Soulfinger, our guest here. And listen, I want you to stay with us because guess what? We do have more show coming up right after this. welcome back. African Communities Together is an organization of African immigrants that are fighting for civil rights, opportunity, and a better life for their families right here in the U.S., as well as back in Africa. Now, the organization empowers African immigrants to integrate socially, to get ahead economically, and engage civically. Joining me now is the director of the New York chapter of the African Communities Together, Robert Agyemang, and we thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, I want to thank you for coming and sharing today and being a part as we have this conversation, because when we talk about African families here in the United States, I think there is this perception that all is well. But the truth is that when we deal with a lot of our families and those who've come from Africa and immigrants, there's still a lot of ground that needs to be covered. So I know your organization really tries to step in and also to help in the area of civil rights and just human rights as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. We work towards trying to improve the quality of life for folks who come here and trying to make sure that they have access to the resources that they need, but also that we advocate on behalf of them and build campaigns that will lead to them being able to access quality of life more broadly. So whether it's targeting specific advocacy issues or general issues, we work on all of those.
Give me a little insight into, a person that's coming in, an immigrant from Africa, assimilating to the U.S. culture. How difficult is it for a person that is coming from Africa to really assimilate right here in the U.S.?
It is quite difficult, and it really depends on the region or country that they come from. A lot of the Africans that do come here, there's the difference in just lifestyle, right? There's a way that they live there that they're accustomed to living. And once they get here, everything is different. Sometimes it has to do with the language barrier, right? Sometimes it has to do with the quality of education and the understanding of how services and things like that translate to them, the neighborhood that they live in, the educational system, whether they have children, all these different things, being able to get into the workforce is another barrier sometimes that people encounter. And so there's so many different levels to being able to get to a point where you can say, okay, I feel comfortable, or I feel more, assimilated to being here. I understand being here. Sometimes it takes years of developing the language capabilities, developing what this country would accept educationally to be able to transition into the work or to transition into, community service or things like that. One of the things that helps with that are houses of worship, whether it's the mosque or the churches. They're very helpful in being able to help the person transition to being here, but it is a process in order to get to a level of comfort being here.
Give me a little about your organization, because I know that that's what you do. You help to assimilate, you help to acclimate, providing access to services and resources. But can we dig down a little deeper and share a little bit about how you're helping people get connected?
Absolutely, absolutely, we can do that. So there's a few things that we work on. One of the is our service with immigration legal services. We have a program, and we have a legal attorney as well as a DOJ accredited representative that helps with folks who come and need access to immigration legal services. That's either free, we give free service, and then also if it's low charge, if it's a particular or specific case that needs to be dealt with, we have partners that we work with, and we're able to refer them to make sure that they get the adequate attention and service that they need. So we do legal services. We also do community services. We have access to different programs through the city. We help people to recognize some programs, whether it's through housing, whether it's cash assistance, whether it's through COVID, there was some COVID assistance for people who encountered that, small business assistance. We help with those things. And we also help with folks who are trying to get access to other resources. So we're a referral hub. We connect them to other organizations who could be helpful in those things as well. So we do a lot of those things. We also have advocacy campaigns that we run in order to help bring awareness to the plight of what's happening to folks in the African communities. And so we've had campaigns based off of increasing language access throughout the state and throughout the city to include more languages that will help a lot of the newer arriving folks to be able to assimilate a little bit easier and quicker. We've developed campaigns built around helping our hair braiders to be able to continue to do their profession at a higher, a higher level and being respected for their work. They encounter some issues with small businesses and things like that. We've built campaigns around that. We've built campaigns around removing electronic monitoring for those who get detained, and also trying to regulate the bail bond space, which is a whole nother level of conversation. But we were successful in getting a bill passed in the state this year addressing those very things. And so we build campaigns, we build advocacy, we also help with service directly to community members as well.
I understand, my experience has taken me over, and I've been over to Africa. And one of the things that really got me was the amount of languages that are actually spoken in Africa. There's a variety of different languages spoken. People are multilingual, and some just have one that they particularly, flow with. However, coming to the United States, English may not always be that language that they are proficient in. How much of a language barrier is it for many that you're seeing and servicing who come from Africa to be able to navigate here in the US with the English language?
English, from my understanding, English might be the most difficult language to learn, just because it is so different from, I guess, the foundational aspects of some of the other languages throughout the world. And so whether it's Latin, French, there's certain fundamental components that allow those languages to kind of translate to each other. But English is more difficult than that, whether it's verb placement and the technicalities of it. And so when folks get here and they don't, they're from a country, maybe a Francophone country, or they're not from one of the countries that were colonialized by Britain or the UK, then the transition into learning English being here, and as you get older, the ability to learn language, it kind of becomes more and more difficult. And so, it's a very difficult transition that people have to encounter. And, you take into account everything else that's being transitioned in their lives at that same time, and so it's just a lot. And so it's very difficult.
A little bit about immigration, because I know that's a huge component of what you're facing too. A lot of people, particularly from Africa, especially during the last presidential election, had to deal with the issue of immigration and immigration status. From where you are, talk to me about, has it improved? What are you seeing amongst your clients? How has immigration transcended over the past few years?
Well, for the folks in our community, the immigration hasn't really improved. There's still a lot of hurdles. There's still a lot of, and if we're going to talk, nationally, there's a hesitancy to touch immigration at a larger scale, just because it is such a strong and divisive topic. And so whether it's the president or the Congress or the House of Representatives, they kind of skirt around the issues of immigration, but nobody has really taken the approach to really dealing with comprehensive immigration policy. And so that trickles down, because now, when you're talking about dealing with ICE, or you're talking about dealing with work authority or dealing with all these other aspects, because these things haven't been dealt with, there's still some of the ramifications that trickle out. And so even you think about the DREAM Act or TPS designations for certain countries, these things are still things that we have to work on and that we have to bring awareness to. And so nationally, that's some of the work that we try to do as well, to continue to advocate on behalf of our folks.
Yeah. Employment's a big issue here in the United States. We know the unemployment rate continues to be challenging for Americans and even more so for immigrants. How are you finding the employment challenge, and what are you doing to really tackle that within your own community?
So employment is been very, very difficult for members in our community. And even if you just think about the national employment rate and then how it actually increases when we're talking about communities of color in general. And now we talk about the African community, where since COVID has come and it's destroyed a lot of these small businesses. It's taken away from a lot of the other smaller, lower income opportunities that folks were able to take advantage of. So unemployment is at an extreme high, and it always operating at an extreme high in these communities. So one of the things that we have begun to look deeply into, and we're building a campaign around it, and actually some tangible work around it, is the African wage gap. It's a project that we have encountered where we are looking at the overeducated but underemployed. We're looking at all the different nuances that are encompassing why our folks are either unemployed or not in the properly waged positions for either their experience or their educational level. And we're trying to take steps to improve that.
For people who want to know more about the work that you're doing and who you actually service, somebody might be saying, listen, how do I engage in the services? What are the requirements for those persons who come under your clientele?
Well, we are open to anybody who needs help. If folks are from the Caribbean, if folks are from Mexico or Puerto Rico, we've dealt with and helped folks from all backgrounds, but our focus is always to continue to help elevate and improve the quality of life for the Africans in New York City. We also have a chapter in the DMV area in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, and we're building one in Philadelphia as well. So we have a national work that we also encounter, which a lot of the federal immigration work and policy work it comes from. But we service people from all backgrounds, but we really focus primarily on the African community because there's very little other support for those communities.
What are you hearing and what are you experiencing in the area of family separation? We know that's huge, right? And these are some of the things that have actually happened. But for the African community, what can you tell us about family separation?
Well, family separation happens a lot, whether somebody gets detained or deported because they were detained, expected to be an illegal resident here. Family separation happens quite often. It is something that we strongly oppose, and we think that there should be stronger measures taken to ensure the family sanctity and unity, and continuing to preserve the family unit. There's so much that happens when you take either the father or the mother out of the family unit and you leave the children to a system, to navigate a system without that kind of level of support. If you just think about the folks that are in the foster care system, the children, how they grow up, the things that they have to go through in order to become, I guess, regular contributing citizens as adults, right? Those things are traumatic. And I think that one of the things that we have to acknowledge is the impact that trauma has on both the individual and then the family. And if we do not treat these traumas, then we're just continuing to create more and more issues that systemically cannot be solved. And the community now has to find ways to kind of patchwork through. And the individual is lost, the family gets lost, and a lot is really hard to recover from. So we do need to find stronger avenues to support families and continue to keep families together. And I think that it's atrocious that this is still something that's continuing to happen.
Before we wrap, I want to get an opportunity to just get your thoughts to be able to share with us. What is it that you would want the public to know about African communities as it relates to Africa and the U.S.?
Just that, we are a people that love people. We're not different. We don't, I also want to just make sure people understand when we come here, we're coming here to look for the same things that everyone else is looking for. We want to improve the quality of our life. We want to have great jobs, we want to live in a great neighborhood. We want to access the better things. And so, we're not looking to take anybody's job. We're not looking to take anybody's space. We're just looking to do what can improve things for our family. And that's really it. We're very much similar to each and every other ethnic group that comes here and is looking for the same thing. Nothing is different. And whether we come from Nigeria or Botswana or Congo or Mali, very much the same hope and dream is there. We're a loving people, and that's the way we go about things.
Robert Agyemang, we want to thank you and leave it right there. Thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums and the work that continues to go on. Thanks much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All righty. Want to let you know now, we've come pretty much to the end of our show, and we want to let you know we hope that you've enjoyed today's show. The discussions have been robust, the information has been shared, and we hope that you will continue to watch the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forum. Now, if you want to rewatch the episode, you can catch the recablecast here on BronxNet TV, or you can go to the website at BronxNet.org. And if you do want to join in on the conversation, don't ever hesitate to visit us on any of our social media platforms at BronxNet TV. Join us next week. We'll continue to elevate the conversation, bring you more inviting and intriguing dialogue, and then have some guests that have some very powerful things to be able to share with us in terms of social justice. I'm Daren Jaime saying thank you for watching the Social Justice Forums. We'll catch you next week here on BronxNet.